Yeah, definitely, 100%. That was really well said. So you spoke there about in your teens that you went through the most difficult times kind of your life. So just take me back to 2005. Your brother Marcus, when he was 18, he sadly passed away. What was that like for you? How did you how was that time like?
So we would have been a very much so like like my brother and I were great friends. We obviously he's my first right friend that I ever had, and we were born in Dublin, and our parents separated when we were about 3 and 5. So Marcus very much so became the man of the house from a very young age, and was very protective of mum and I, and always kind of was like took up that, I guess, that nurturing and protective role as pretty much straight away. And all through my life, then he was very protective of me. But we also got on really well together. But he also was quite strict with me. So I guess with dad not being around, Marcus felt the need to be the strict one, whereas mum would have been much more relaxed and laid back with me and with her parenting. Whereas it was Marcus that was probably the strictest influence in my life, but in a good way. He made me study. He made me play sport. He's just very good like that. But he was also very caring and empathetic as well to me. And he just, I suppose, growing up then when he was a teenager and I was in national school, it felt like there was a huge age gap between us. And then when I got into secondary school and he was still in secondary school, then we kind of became really good friends then, because I suppose I was growing up and I was no longer kind of a child. So yeah, things were getting on really well. And I just remember at that stage of my life, I was getting ready for my junior cert and he was in leaving cert, and we had our mocks. Junior leaving cert mocks, and he came home early. He was in boarding school, and I remember that weekend we'd like usual plans. He just turned 18, so he was like able to legally go out. So every weekend he'd come home, he'd arrange something with the lads, and that night they were planning to go into Galway City, and he bought a new shirt, and like it was all really exciting. I suppose when you turn 18 and you're suddenly allowed to go out, it's like a big deal. I was horse riding with dad that weekend, and I had plans then to go over to my friends. There was like a youth club in Kinvara that we used to go, we'd all meet up and just hang out together. So because we were all at that 15 awkward age where we couldn't really go out and we were too old for discos. So that was our plan for the weekend. And yeah, so then that Friday night, just everything changed. We Marcus went to rugby training, I went horse riding, and that night I was sitting on the horse and I saw an ambulance going back the road, and I just thought that's a bit unusual, like for 9 o'clock on a Friday. And by the time I got home, we found out there'd been an accident, and then it turned out that ambulance was heading towards Marcus, and our neighbour as well, who sadly passed away on impact. He was driving the car, and he was like our next door neighbour at home, and Cahill lost his life, I said instantly, but Marcus didn't. Marcus was brought into hospital, was walking and talking initially, and then went in for surgery. But as the hours went on, he had a lot of internal damage, and he lost his battle then on the 5th of March at 1:45 in the morning. So we were all there in the hospital. All my mum comes from a big family of 11, neighbours, friends of his, friends of mine. It just like people from rugby, people from horse riding, like loads of people came into the hospital that night, and a lot of people were there to support us, because I guess everyone knew that Cahill had passed away and how tragic this was already. And then the fact that Marcus was in hospital, I think everyone kind of came in to, I guess, show support, but also I think everyone was just hoping for that Marcus would survive, because losing Cahill was already an awful experience, and we just knew this was going to be so massive for his family and then for the community of our Drahan. We're a very, very small village. But then tragically we lost Marcus too. So losing two very prominent young men from our parish, they were hurling, they played hurling and football, they played rugby. They were very much so very popular lads. Everyone liked the two of them, like they were very friendly. And I think the fact that we just lost the two of them in 1 week, one night, it was just huge tragedy for all of us. But I guess for us as a family, it was just the most shocking, awful, traumatic, sad, angry, terrible time. Like my mother and father were absolutely inconsolable. My mother would just cry all the time. Like, I actually sometimes look at her like, I don't know how you still have tears to cry. She would cry through the night. She would cry everywhere we went. We couldn't go. If we left the house, she'd cry. If she met someone new, she'd cry. And Dad was really angry. So Dad was just constantly angry all the time. So I was kind of between the two of them. Dad lived only a couple of miles away, so I'd spend weekends with him and I'd be with Mum during the week. And for me, it was a very much so trying to juggle the two of them, because they were, obviously in such a bad way. And I then couldn't express my grief, because I thought, well, I have a really sad mother, I have a really angry father. I need to be strong for them, because and as well, I felt pressured to give them hope because they lost Marcus, but I kind of was like, I'm still here, and you know, I'm enough as well. Maybe can I be enough to help you both, because they were in so much pain that I just wanted to be able to cure them both and to help them both. But obviously you learn about grief as you get older, and as time goes on, is that everyone goes through different stages and phases, and you know, everyone has to deal with it themselves. Like, it's a very lonely process, grief. Even though when you think about it, you're never actually alone, because people are grieving every single day. People are sadly dying every single day. Families are dealing with this loss and this tragedy. But it just feels so lonely, and you can't comprehend when you are grieving that everyone else is suffering too, and that's what's really difficult as well, because you just think you can't turn to anyone, but in actual fact there's loads of people to turn to if you just look around and ask for help. So yeah, it was just a great, like, but I think back now at that time, like, there's so many memories that are really strong in my mind, like his funeral, Robbie Williams' Angels being sung in the church, all the Garbally guys in their uniforms being up around the church and carrying out the coffin, and the flag and the jerseys, and just really, really strong. So like, when I think back to 2005, sometimes it just feels like only a few years ago. And then when I think, oh my God, we're actually in 2021 now, I just can't believe so many years have passed as well. So it's been like the most, like, anyone who's listening who's lost someone understands, it's the most up and down roller coaster, in and out and around, and it just, like, it takes years. And I really think that's a huge important thing for people to understand, because I found I was getting really angry at myself for not grieving faster, and I was like, why am I over this? Why am I still angry? Why am I still sad? Why am I still depressed? But like, it took time, and whereas now I can actually say I've gone through it all and I have come out the other side, and that there is actually hope, and there is happiness, and there is good times as well. After losing someone, you can actually smile and laugh again, and you can actually have a good life. Like, I'm probably at maybe the happiest I've been in a long time, because I've done my grieving, and I've done a lot of work on myself.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. It does come out in your personality. Like, you do have a wonderful, lovely, bubbly personality all the time. But like, something like that would have crippled most people, and 18 months later, your dad sadly passed on as well. Like, I just cannot imagine how difficult that must have been for you and your mom. Could you even comprehend it at the time, or what was that like?
Yeah, so Dad, Dad was very angry for a long time after Marcus's death, and I think he'd been in and out of hospital since he was 18, so I think he felt very outdone by, like, how come he'd cheated death so many times, like how Dad had survived, like, triple heart bypass, kidney transplant, major heart surgeries, and major, like, he did huge stints in hospital. I think he'd been given his last rites like a number of times throughout the years by priests, because he was dying, and he never did, and he always pulled through. And I think the fact that Marcus only, was in his first ever accident and died. So I think Dad held on to a lot of anger, and probably, why him and why not me, and, a lot of that. And then he went to South Africa on holidays a couple of months after Marcus died. And I remember at the time thinking, what are you doing? But obviously he was running away from the grief, because he couldn't handle being around home, because it was a constant reminder of Marcus. So he left, and he went for a 2-week holiday and ended up staying for a couple of months. And I was like, Dad, like, you coming home? And he was just like, no, I'm just going to stay a bit longer. So I was like, okay, fine. And eventually he came home, and I remember he came to see me, and he like bought me like gifts in South Africa, and he arrived into the door, and I just looked at him, and I was like, what has happened to you? He just like looked like a shell of who he was, and he just looked weaker, and you could just tell, I could still see all the pain. He obviously hadn't dealt with any of the grief in South Africa. Instead, I'd say he just tried to ignore it. And I think then what I've noticed with grief is that when you ignore it and try to push it down, it can come out in sickness. Like, I would have gotten an awful lot of chest infections after Marcus died, because I was holding onto the grief in my chest, into my heart, and it turned into chest infections. And that's apparently like a known thing. Like, Mum would have gotten chest infections, but it's the grief can form into an infection in your body, because you're not like releasing it, you're not getting it out there. And I remember thinking there's something wrong with me, but it was just, I think it was because I hadn't cried. Like, I didn't cry at all. So I had all those tears trapped inside me, and it came out in a chest infection. So Dad had gotten sick and gotten worse, and then he went into hospital at Christmas after Marcus died, and he just didn't really come out again. And then in March, it was Marcus' first anniversary, and we as a family were like, Dad will never miss this. Like, my dad used to, like, nobody should do this, but Dad used to check himself, sign himself like out of hospital because he'd want to go to like a horse show, or he'd want to go racing, or he'd want to go to something that was on, our party. And I was like, Dad, you're in hospital. I don't care. I am not missing it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
and let you off. Dad was very much so his own person, and his funeral song was Frank Sinatra. I did it my way, so he was very much so did it his way person. But you know what? Looking back, he had a great life, so that's what he wanted to do. But yeah, so he never came to Marcus' anniversary. So then I knew then this is serious, because he'd never, like, that was a huge moment, and he didn't come. So then that summer he just kind of came in and out of hospital, and anytime he came out, he was weaker and weaker. And then eventually that summer of 2006 he went into hospital and never really came out. And then on the 12th of August in 2006 he passed away, and he passed away during the night as well, almost to the same hour that Marcus died. And it was the night during the RDS Horse Show, which was his favourite event, and it's what we went to every year together. And it was between the Puissance and the Aga Khan, which are his two favourite international competitions. So we're kind of like, oh, you know, you did it your way, Dad. Like, you went during the horse show, your favourite competitions. And then we found out the next day that they held a minute silence for him in the RDS. So he would have loved that. So I think when I heard that, I was really happy, because I was like, that would have been Dad all over. But obviously then suddenly obviously people started to hear, and then, you know, everyone started ringing and texting because everyone had heard that he had passed. And yeah, it was just, I remember the day he died. I remember that maybe I'd been in hospital with him all that week, and I was in hospital that night with him, and I held his hand when he died. And I remember then being driven home to my mum. Mum was at home in our home house, and she opened the door, and it was about maybe 6 or 7 in the morning, because we'd been up all night with Dad. And then she just opened the door, and I was like, I just went, he's gone. And I just walked in, and she gave me a hug, and I just was like, I'm going to bed. So I just went to bed then. And I remember then sitting in the sitting room floor the next morning, just sitting on the floor, and people are ringing and texting the house. But I just was like, I just kind of everything. I remember just feeling very numb. And then my stepdad, I remember he came in to me, and he was like, I'm very sorry to hear about your father. And I was like, yeah, it's grand. Like, I remember just thinking, I can't believe this happened. It was just shock, because I was like, I haven't even dealt with my brother's death, let alone process that my dad was dying. So yeah, just a very, very numb, surreal experience.
Yeah, I can imagine, because like you were 15 when your brother sadly passed, and then you were what, 17, nearly 18 when your dad, like you're going through enough changes at that age as it is. You've exams to do. Like it must have been literally, like, how did you focus to get through school? Because like a lot of people wouldn't have been able to manage that.
I think when someone dies like that in such a tragic time, and especially during your teenage years, as you mentioned, are very like hormones and school and subjects, and just there's a lot going on anyways.
Yeah.
I think I had two choices, and I think it was either go down a self-destructive bad road, as they say, throw away my education and literally go off the rails, which I think a lot of people were watching out for, like my family especially, and I think teachers and my friends were very much so keeping an eye on me, because and if I did go down that road, it wouldn't have been surprising, and I don't think anyone would have blamed me. But I think everyone was very much so keep an eye on me, because everyone was very nervous that would happen, but also they were there for me if it was going to happen. But I just knew that Marcus was a massive influence on my life, and he made me study. And I remember when he came home with weekends from Garbally, he had a timetable made for us, because he was studying, he wanted to be a vet, so he was studying all the time around the clock, but also sport was very important to us. So he would come back and he'd be like, okay, so we're studying in the morning, and then we're going to go out and play puck around, and then we're going to come in and have lunch, then we're going to go back studying, then we're going to go out and like kick the ball around, then we're going to come back in and study, and then you can watch TV. So I was like, oh, okay, fine. But like I was in junior cert, so I was like, whatever. And then I'd go into the TV room and I'd turn on the TV, and next minute I'd hear him coming down, and he'd pull the remote off me, turn off the TV, and be like, get into your room now and study. I was like, oh my God, I'm only doing my junior cert. And he was like, no, that's not the attitude. This is the start of it. Come on, study. So I was like, okay, fine. So every weekend I had to do what he did. But then after he died, I said he died in March after the mock. So I had the junior cert then coming up in June. So for the first few weeks, I didn't really do anything. I just sat in the classroom, and I wasn't even there. And to be fair, the teachers actually said to me, they're like, and my first secondary school was an all-girls convent, which was very heavily focused on education and getting A's and B's. And, you know, if you got a C, it was kind of like, come on now, pull up the socks. What are you doing wrong? So it was very like textbook heavy. But the teachers all said to me, they were like, Meghann, you don't even have to listen. I know you're here. Don't take part. We will leave you out. And then after a few weeks, I was like, I know the answer to this. So I suddenly then started putting my hand up and started getting involved. And the teachers then were very much so like, yeah, if you want to get involved, you know, be my guest. But equally, if you ever want to just walk out of the classroom, walk out. And so I always knew I had that support. But I also knew that Marcus really wanted me to do well, and he wanted to do well. So more so for him, I think he was the driver behind everything that I did in those few years, because everything I did for Marcus. It wasn't for me. It's all for Marcus. So then I wanted to do him proud. So I was like, right, I want to do him proud. So I put the head down and studied. And I found school and education for me was the best distraction I ever could have had, because it meant that I could be away from the grief that was at home. So I loved school. I actually loved school. And then the same with Dad. I just knew I'd started my June. Dad died in August, started by leaving cert in September. And I just said, that's it. Head down, focus.